Welcome to the Daily TV Mass Online Advent Retreat with Cardinal Thomas Collins. Thursday, second week of Advent. Discipleship as Stewardship.
In Advent, we think not only of the coming of the Messiah at Bethlehem so many years ago, but as disciples of Jesus, as Advent Christians, we think of his second coming at the end of time, and more personally, at the end of our life. This shapes the way in which we behave. We are all preparing for the time when, as in Matthew chapter 25, the Son of Man comes in glory, and all the angels with him, and he sits on his glorious throne. The Gospels are filled with many parables, speaking of servants who await the coming of the Master, as we await the coming of the Master at the end of our life, as well as at the end of time. These parables of expectation emphasize the need for accountability. For when the Master returns, he will hold the servant to account for the way in which he has made use of what has been given to him. We Christians are stewards, that is, servants to whom the Master entrusts his property, which in our case means our whole life, and especially the time which is given to us during our brief journey through this valley of tears, on our way home to the heavenly city of Jerusalem. We are entrusted with this time, and we need to use it well. It is especially our expectation of the coming of the Master at the moment of our death that leads us to seek to use wisely the gift of time which God has given us. This accountability is the other side of trust. God trusts us, but he does hold us to account for the way in which we spend our life on earth. We do not simply drift along. With Advent expectation of the second coming of the Lord, we are encouraged as disciples of Jesus to live more responsibly, with greater accountability. This is why Advent is a time of penance, when we should receive the sacrament of reconciliation and think of how we're using the time which God has entrusted to us for our brief journey through this world. In chapters 24 and 25 of the Gospel of Matthew, we find spiritually fruitful references both to the effective use of our talents and to our accountability for the use on the day of judgment, when the Lord separates the sheep from the goats. Matthew 25 is a very valuable spiritual lesson for each one of us as we await the coming of the Lord in a spirit of Advent discipleship. The chapter has 3 sections. The first relates to the 10 bridesmaids and emphasizes how we have a choice in life to be wise or foolish in the way in which we await the coming of the Lord. The bridegroom in this parable comes at a time that the bridesmaids do not know, and so they must be ready to greet him. 5 were ready because they prepared oil for their lamps. 5 had no extra oil. And when the lamps went out, they were not ready to greet the bridegroom. In our life of Advent expectation of the coming of the Lord, we need to be ready to meet him by living a life of justice, mercy, and compassion. The next section of Matthew chapter 25 is the famous parable of the talents. Another version of it is found in the Gospel of Luke, with the only difference being that in Luke, each servant is trusted with the same amount of property, whereas in Matthew, the 3 servants are given different amounts according to their ability. But the point is the same. Servants are entrusted with talents, which at that time meant blocks of silver, but which in our time has come to mean abilities and gifts which we are given by the Lord. He gives us the opportunity to make good use of these gifts if we will do so. This is part of the joy of our life of discipleship. But the Master will return, and hold us to account for our use of what he has entrusted to us. In Matthew's Gospel, it is clear that it does not matter so much which gifts one receives. The main point is to make the best use of whatever one has been given. That is how we should approach our life as we await the Lord at the moment of our death. Each one of us has many gifts, and we need to use them fruitfully to the best of our ability. If we do so, we will not fear the coming of the Lord. It is significant that right after the parable of the 10 bridesmaids and the parable of the talents, we have the judgment of the nations when the Lord comes in glory with all his angels with him and sits on his throne in judgment. It is here that we see what we are called to do during our brief life on earth. That is, what it means to use our talents fruitfully. In this scene of judgment, when the master separates the sheep and the goats, we realize that what is expected of us is that we care for those around us and that we recognize the presence of Jesus in each of them and act accordingly. We must lead an intentional life, not simply drifting along from moment to moment, but aware that we are stewards of the time God has entrusted to us and that we will be held accountable for it. This is important to us personally, but it also is a spiritual foundation for a pastoral movement called Stewardship, in which the members of each parish are encouraged to reflect upon how they make use of the gifts of time, talent, and treasure for the glory of God and the service of their neighbor. We Christians live an Advent life, not a mindless one, but one which is focused on our expectation of the coming of the Lord, when he will hold us accountable for how we have creatively used the gifts that God has given to us for the glory of God and the service of our neighbor.
Join us tomorrow for The Day of the Lord,